I did enjoy Gay Witch Hunt, but I'm not fully satisfied. I got some of what I wanted, but not everything, but it has left me really curious. See what happens with the rest of the third season of The Office. This is early days. This is only the first episode of the third season. It's directed by Ken Kwapis, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. And I mentioned in my discussion for the previous episode, there will be spoilers, not just for this episode, but what happened at the end of that one. I mentioned in that discussion that I was desperate to watch the second episode, or the next episode rather, and I've now seen it. And yeah, there were some things that I was pleased about, some things I'm not very happy about, and I don't know if they're going to be ongoing. I'll talk about those in a moment. It's actually established pretty quickly what one of the changes is. And Rainn says that he got Jim's old job. And immediately I thought, okay, he must have put in for the transfer. And Pam looks over at Rainn the way she used to look over at Jim. And then we get the flashback of when they kissed at the end of the previous episode. But it goes on for another minute or so. And Pam tells Jim that she wanted to kiss him too, but she is still going ahead with the wedding. And we don't find out about that in any more detail until a good way into the episode. We'll get there in a moment. The main narrative, though, focuses on the fact that Michael called Oscar a word that I'm not even comfortable saying. Fagggy. And this word is obviously unacceptable today. I feel it would have been unacceptable at the time. But he didn't realise that Oscar was gay. And he said that if he knew Oscar was gay, he wouldn't have used the word. Would that have made it okay? Not knowing Oscar's gay? I don't think so. I still think it's an inappropriate word. But as soon as he realised that Oscar was gay, and he would have taken the word personally, at least to Michael's credit, he did genuinely feel bad, and he did realise what he'd done wrong. And we'll come back to that in a little bit. We then spend some time with Jim at his new job. I did temporarily panic that Jim wasn't going to be in it, but then his name was in the opening, so that wasn't a big deal, thankfully. And obviously with him now working in Stanford, we get some new characters. They're calling him Big Tuna, which is very bizarre. And in his new place of work, they're actually having to have a diversity policy refresher because of problems at the Scranton branch. And Jim kind of pulled a face to the camera, which I liked. And then a character called Karen, played by Rashida Jones, comments that Jim is always making faces at the camera. And it's kind of establishing that this working environment, in some ways, is going to be very different. And it's a very different atmosphere. I honestly, I don't know what they're going to do going forward. Does this mean that Jim works at a different branch for the rest of the show, for the rest of the seasons? If so, that would give us new characters and a lot of new faces, and that could be a good thing. But the idea of Jim not being in the Scranton branch, not being there for Pam, not being there to wind up Dwight, I don't want to think about that. So I'm really nervous that this is our future. But I'm not going to look ahead. I'll find out when I get there. But my verdict is that it's okay temporarily, but I really hope, in an ideal world, please don't confirm this, if this is right or wrong. I don't want to know. I want to find out as I get there. But my hopes would be Jim and Pam get together and Jim finds a way to move back to the Scranton branch in a higher position, perhaps. But I don't know. We'll see. I'll find out when I get there. Michael actually phones up Jim, asking him where he can buy a gaydar, because now Michael's worried he's going to offend other people, so he wants to try and identify the gays. And he thinks that he can use an actual gaydar machine, which is absolutely ludicrous. And then Roy comes up with lunch for Pam, and I thought, they're still together. She went through with the wedding. And then actually, she tells the camera pretty quickly that she didn't go through with the wedding. She got cold feet. She's now got her own place. She's taking art classes. No mention of Jim. I will say, it would be a little bit unrealistic or unbelievable to break up with somebody just before your wedding and then immediately jumping into a relationship, even if you're in love with that person. I feel like it would be really unhealthy. So I'm glad that she's taking this time to work on herself. And I say this, and in the next episode, they might drop the news that actually they're having a secret relationship or something. But either way, I'm not too concerned if Pam's not in a relationship with Jim immediately. But it has to happen at some time or I will be very, very upset. Roy then talks to the camera, which doesn't happen that often. If ever. It might have happened once or twice, but I can't remember. And he basically says he's going to try and win her back. I really, really hope that they don't milk that too much. I don't want this drawn-out story of Roy trying these things to win her back. A little bit maybe, but I don't want it to go on forever. We're then back at the Stanford branch with Jim, and he's put somebody's calculator in Jell-O, calling back to, I think, the first episode, when he put Dwight Stapler in Jell-O, which is tremendous fun. We're then back, it's Scranton, and Jan has come over to obviously talk about this situation and the problems Michael has caused yet again. Dwight's looking at gay porn. Jan then points out to Michael that he outed Oscar, and that's not something I'd actually thought about. And I feel like calling him a name is not great, but then being the reason he is outed to the office on top of that, it's not a great day for Michael or for Oscar. And Michael then has a meeting. He says something that Pam laughs at. Pam turns around to laugh towards Rainn, I guess, as she would instinctively do towards Jim, and he doesn't respond. So it's a very different working environment for Pam as well. And Michael says a lot in this meeting. He also says gay marriage currently is not legal under US law, which threw me for a second because it's kind of easy to forget. Well, I think it's easy to forget for just how little amount of time gay marriage has been legal in the UK, certainly, and in the States. It doesn't feel that recent, but I guess it actually is, and it just threw me for a second when he said that, and I wonder how this episode would have hit. I feel like this episode would have felt very different when it was first broadcast to what it does now. Dwight is the one with the bad attitude, though. He says, and genuinely, he shocked me when he said this. I thought even for Dwight, this was quite far, because he said, I think all the other office gays should identify themselves or I will do it for them. That's, even for Dwight, that seems uncalled for. And Oscar is clearly thinking the same. He's had enough. He said he doesn't think he can work there anymore. And he ends up getting into an argument with Michael. And I have to praise Oscar because he really stood up for himself and he called Michael ignorant and insulting and small. And that really hurt Michael. And Michael ended up getting upset. Oscar ended up giving him a hug. And Michael took it a couple of steps too far by kissing Oscar in the most awkward kiss ever. Oscar clearly didn't want this to happen. It was a very awkward moment. And I did think, if I were Oscar in this situation and I'd been called a derogatory name for a homosexual, I'd then been outed to the office, and then my boss had kissed me forcibly in front of everybody, I would walk. I would leave. That would be horrendous. But Jan said that Oscar could take, I think she said, 3 months paid vacation and he can have a company car. And Oscar realises, actually, that's a pretty good deal. So I'm glad that Oscar's sticking around. And I'm glad that ultimately he was happy with things. And the last kind of 30 seconds or so are awkward and funny a bit and a little emotional. Because Dwight's gaydar arrives. It's a metal detector. And he uses it on Oscar, and then he uses it in front of himself, and it beeps. Obviously, I think he's wearing a belt, metal belt, and of course he begins to panic, and Pam smirks at this, and the camera's really up close in her face, but just in about the space of 2, maybe 3 seconds, she smirks, and just before the camera cuts, her face kind of drops, as if she's suddenly overcome with this sadness. presumably because she's smirking, she wants to share this funny thing with Jim, and she realizes he's not there. That's my reading of it anyway. So those last couple of seconds were a bit of a roller coaster in themselves. The episode as a whole is very well done. It is a little long, in fact, basically as far as Dwight is concerned, it's exceptionally uncomfortable. I don't think Michael handled things the way he should have done, but I think he was trying to do the right thing. And that's not always the case with Michael. I feel like as the show's gone on, he has developed, he has had some growth and maturity. I feel like Michael of the first season, I really didn't like the first season. Michael probably wouldn't have made much of an effort to do the right thing. I think he would have stood his ground a little bit more and said, well, as he said at one point, gay used to mean happy. I feel like he would have just stood his ground a bit more with that argument. So we have some growth with Michael. Dwight seems to be going the opposite direction. I feel like Dwight just becomes more of a problem. I love the character. I think he's brilliant. He's a brilliantly written character and the performance is amazing. But I do think as the episodes progress, Michael's going forward with his growth and maturity. And Dwight seems to be going backwards. So I'm keen to see how far they take things with Dwight. And it seems to be, and maybe I'm reading too much into this, but it seems to be ever since we found out about his relationship with Angela. In fact, the first time I remember thinking that Dwight was not just odd, he was mean, is when he met Jim's roommate. This is the episode quite a while ago now when Jim had the barbecue and everybody came over and Dwight ended up being there and he was really nasty to Jim's roommate. And that's the first time I remember thinking, you're actually quite mean. You're not just strange, you're mean. And I feel like that's also the episode where we learned about Dwight and Angela. And I feel like ever since then, he's just been getting a little bit more twisted. I'm wondering if that's the influence from Angela. Because we know Angela is twisted. We know she's nasty. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. Maybe it's just a coincidence. But maybe not. So I'm keen to see what happens with Dwight and how far they take the character. And I need Jim back. I genuinely feel very emotional about that. I didn't think I would. And I also didn't think he'd leave Scranton either, to be fair, so I wasn't really prepared for that. So can we get Jim back? And with Pam? That would be ideal. That might be asking for a bit too much, at least for now. But if we can get rid of Roy and bring Jim back, and, well, they can do what they like with Dwight. I don't mind. If Dwight is going to come crashing down, I will watch it and enjoy it. But I need Jim back. Looking forward to finding out what the rest of this season has in store. And Gay Witch Hunt is definitely not a bad start to the season.